For the purposes of this content, best shall be defined as most preferred by Pater Franson when compared to a limited sample of alternatives. Alright, everyone else seems to be doing it, so I'm jumping on the bandwagon, and I thought it would be fun too. I'm going to go back and take a look and tell you what are my picks for the best games of the last decade, which is the 2010s or the 10s or the teens. I don't know what we call that. All right, here we go. In no particular order, starting with Skyrim. I don't think there's anything I can say about this game that hasn't already been said. I mean, I loved Oblivion, and this was that, and a big step forward in every way. Never before or since have I felt like I could be anyone and do anything in a fantasy world to the degree that this game allows. It released over 8 years ago, and I still haven't played an RPG that exceeds or even matches that kind of flexibility. I mean, what more can I say? It's Skyrim. Come on. Next up, Thunderstone Advance. When I had very young boys and less time available, finding a shorter dungeon crawl tabletop experience was kind of like an ongoing mission for me. And for a number of years, Thunderstone Advance was the perfect fit for me. Although it lacked a campaign mode, the deck building mechanic was still a fresh novelty at the time that it came out, and tons of expansions added more monsters to fight and loot to equip and spells to learn. The art design had this cool D&D inspired aesthetic that I'm such a sucker for, and the options for solo and co-op play rounded this game out as my default dungeon crawl for at least a couple of years. Pillars of Eternity, originally on PC and then later to consoles. While the game industry has been content to pump out tons of action RPGs and turn-based RPGs and real-time strategy games, for a long time it seemed to have forgotten the real-time with pause combat systems like featured in Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter Nights, Final Fantasy XII, Dragon Age Origins. Then came Obsidian, the underdog developer that could, with a last-ditch effort that would really make or break their company. And I'd highly recommend that you check out the documentary on the Obsidian YouTube channel that tells that story. Pillars of Eternity is a game that features this new fantasy world, but it still takes inspiration from D&D fantasy aesthetics and ripped its classic-feeling gameplay straight from the days when BioWare was really at their very best. This game also uniquely plays with themes of reincarnation and religion that, while not saying anything unique philosophically, still gave me moments of thought and reflection, and I appreciate that when a game will do that. I've played through this game twice now, first on PC, then finished it more recently on PlayStation 4, and have recently realized that I not only enjoy it, but it's actually one of my favorite games of all time. Mad Max on the PlayStation 4. This game really had no right to be as good as it was for me, but Avalanche Studios made an open-world vehicle combat movie tie-in game with melee combat that was broken in just the right way for me so that I could cheese through fights and not worry about difficulty, as I tend to be terrible at action games. It visually nailed the world of Mad Max, and the dialogue and characters fit right in with Mad Max Fury Road, which came out in theaters at about the same time this game was released. It included even the broken ideas regarding human identity that are tragically portrayed in Mad Max Fury Road. And the slow motion aiming mechanic for the car combat made it technically feasible, and like mechanically fun for me, while also creating these frequent and awesome cinematic slow motion spectacles that I really, really enjoyed. Fallout 4 was not the leap forward that many, I think, wanted for the series, including myself, either graphically or mechanically, but it was still more of what I and many others loved about Fallout 3, with some improvements as well. VATS was less vital as a targeting system in the gameplay, making the game often playable as a straight-up shooter. The new building mechanics that you could use to build little settlements, though not incentivized in gameplay, were a great addition that, for me, added dozens of hours to my playtime. And the crafting system made all the garbage that you pick up in all the places that you explore meaningful and valuable. And for a looting fiend like me, that really added a lot to my experience. The script played with themes of both religion and human nature, leaning predictably in a non-theistic direction, which is very par for the course in science fiction, but it was still interesting and thought-provoking, if at times, a little tired out and frustrating in some of the directions that they took it. But the willingness to explore those things is something that I continue to appreciate, no matter what the worldview is of the writers involved. And with mods being available on console for the first time on this game, this is a game that I'm likely going to get at least one more great lengthy playthrough out of. That Dragon Cancer, this is not a game that you play for fun, and it really pushed forward how I would even define the word game. It's not made for a Christian audience in particular, but That Dragon Cancer unapologetically portrays a true story of family tragedy from the perspective of Christian parents who understandably are struggling with their faith as they go through the horrific experience of having a young child with cancer. And the fact that this is a true story about the developers themselves using real-world audio recordings made my emotional investment far more intense than I've experienced with any game in my life. More than any game that I can think of, That Dragon Cancer is a worthwhile experience that may actually be not only good for you to play, but even important for you to do so. No Man's Sky. I mean, this game could almost be on my list just for how dramatic a story it has created since launching in 2016. Extremely overhyped before its release, it launched with a ton of shortcomings, disappointing and even angering many customers. Although I enjoyed the procedurally generated universe-exploring space game for what it was at launch, which was basically a sci-fi space exploration and survival game, I later put over 100 more hours into it after the developers released massive content updates that deepened and enriched the experience more and more. It also explores now and then philosophical questions about the nature of humanity and reality itself in a possibly tongue-in-cheek, metaphorical way, referring to the game itself on a sort of meta level. In a little over 2 years' time, it went from being a game that I enjoyed to becoming really one of my favorite games of all time. Wolfenstein: The New Order and the follow-up to it, The New Colossus. While not the commercial success of some other games on this list, Wolfenstein: The New Order is one of the few games that I have been motivated to play in part for its story and its characters, in addition to the great gameplay. In this game, the Nazis have won World War II, and now you, as protagonist BJ Blazkowicz, must free the world from their grip as a world-weary, grizzled veteran of the war. In my mind, this game is second only to Farscape in its ability to pivot from bonkers scenarios and characters to these genuinely dramatic and touching moments, almost turning on a dime from one to the other in some cases. On top of that, this game dares to sensitively and subtly comment on belief in God, suggesting a better, hopeful life apart from atheism's logically inevitable despair. And dang, this game has some nasty bad guys. I've never felt more motivated to go out and clear a level after I've watched some of the cutscenes in this game. And then, although criticized for its intense difficulty on normal and harder difficulty settings, I found the sequel, Wolfenstein: The New Colossus, to be just as enjoyable as the original on my default of the easiest difficulty setting. And while the touching dramatic moments certainly returned, the game cut loose even more with completely bonkers story elements. Oh, and that major story choice that you made near the start of the first game, which created two very different story paths and experiences, that choice also carries over and affects the gameplay and the story in this game, adding massive and surprising replay value. Far Cry 3. Although I really did enjoy, surprisingly, given my tastes normally, the nail-biting tension of Far Cry 2, Far Cry 3 added some welcome, heads-up display elements and quality-of-life elements that now help define almost all Ubisoft open-world games, and the first-person perspective combined with Ubisoft's excellent atmospheric and Foley sound effects pulled me into the present tense of a game world in a way I had never felt before this one. Assassin's Creed Brotherhood and Assassin's Creed Revelations share a single spot on this list. Although Assassin's Creed 2 was released in 2009, otherwise I'd mention it in this list, the other two parts of the Ezio trilogy did release in the last decade and helped the series find and continue its groove of gameplay elements that many fans have enjoyed so much. Although it experimented with some supplemental gameplay elements that I didn't like very much, the core gameplay of stealthily taking down outposts made me a huge fan of Ubisoft. And the way they brought these worlds to life through meticulous sound design as well as great visuals hooked me from the very beginning. Although Black Flag is also a fan favorite in this series, many will tell you that the Ezio trilogy represents the peak of classic Assassin's Creed era gameplay and helped define the gameplay that Ubisoft is known and loved for in general. Continuing with Assassin's Creed Origins released in the last decade, just when I was getting fed up, too, with Ubisoft's insta-fail missions in the Assassin's Creed series, and frustrated with their recurring attempts to fix things that I didn't think were broken, suddenly they revamped the franchise as an open-world action RPG. Climbing and parkour became a breeze. They weren't leaning on that as like a difficulty element or, an element creating challenge in the game. They just kind of let you climb where you want to climb in most respects. Combat was now more forgiving, and I could level grind, if I ever felt out of my depth for both gear and just XP and upgrading on a skill tree, Add to that all the expected yet improved graphics and sound design that make Ubisoft worlds so enveloping, and I really could not have been happier about this fresh start for the series. Ghost Recon Wildlands, we're keeping on the Ubisoft wagon right now. In either a bold move or a very safe one, Ubisoft shifted its long-running Ghost Recon series to an open-world format, translating much of the Far Cry-style gameplay to a third-person perspective, and then adding AI squad mates to that experience. Another fun addition was vehicle missions involving these fun chases across the giant open-world map. And dramatically increased in this game was the flexibility in how you can achieve various objectives. And that was really appreciated by me, since Ubisoft had really leaned on timed missions or insta-fail stealth missions and stuff like that for a long time. Around this time in their games, they really started to open up and allow players to really just not be limited by those constraints and carry out objectives in whatever way they, could figure out to do themselves. I arrived late to this party, but Ghost Recon Wildlands quickly and surprisingly became one of my favorite games of all time. Another surprise for me with how much I enjoyed it was Monster Hunter World. This game was a risky purchase for me back in January of 2018. The Monster Hunter series is notoriously unwelcoming toward newcomers, with numerous complex systems that are obscured, not very well explained at all, if at all. But with the help of online resources, I discovered a deep enjoyment of those same systems, along with the intense rush of taking on these massive and visually overwhelming monsters in one-on-one combat. This game offered me an experience for every mood, from relaxed exploration and resource gathering to thoughtful crafting and upgrading to these pulse-pounding cinematic boss battles. I've put hundreds of hours into this game now, which unexpectedly became my game of the year in 2018 and also one of my favorite games of all time. Bloodstained Ritual of the Night. Although Metroidvanias, as many call them, are a dime a dozen these days, what I call symphony-likes are much more rare. They include the exploration, item use, and backtracking of Metroidvanias, but they add experience and loot systems, creating an exploratory side-scrolling action RPG experience. And though Konami stopped making the games that kind of define that genre, the arguable creator of the genre stepped out on his own to make this spiritual successor to the much-loved Castlevania games. It is nothing more and nothing less than more of what came before. But since what came before was video game greatness in my book, more of the same with something that I easily enjoyed a lot. All right, and finally, Pathfinder, the adventure card game, Rise of the Rune Lords. Although I didn't fully appreciate it at first, I really came to love what this game provides. It essentially takes the mechanics of a D&D style tabletop RPG and distills them into a deck building, dice chucking game that can be played solo or cooperatively with friends. Combat, exploration, looting, upgrading, it even includes systems for charisma interactions. All of that is brought into this much more streamlined mechanical format. It has a great fantasy art style, at least for my taste, loving the D&D aesthetic quite a bit, with a setup, teardown, and playtime that is much more manageable than most other games that have similarly rich gameplay mechanics. And maybe most important to me in games of this type, it features campaign play, allowing you to see your heroes change and grow more powerful over dozens of play sessions. For my current stage of life, Pathfinder, the adventure card game, is actually the ultimate tabletop dungeon crawl experience for me. All right, those are my favorite games, video games and tabletop games of the last decade. Obviously, my tastes are going to differ from yours, so I would love to hear what is not on this list that you would put on yours. You can leave those in the comments below, and then, of course, I hope you'll join us soon over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. We've got a ton going on here at Spirit Blade Productions and Christian Geek Central, including our in-depth Bible study for geeks, movie, game, and other entertainment reviews or commentary, live streams, Christian geek news, original audio dramas, and tons more. And on top of all that, you can become a Spirit Blade insider with an influential voice and get access to exclusive content and rewards. It's your involvement as a patron that will keep all of this going and growing, so I want to thank you for your consideration in that. For more information, please check out our Patreon page through the link below at patreon.com/spiritbladeproductions. Thanks for listening.